we're going to be practicing in stillness. So I'm going to encourage folks to find a position that you can maintain for the duration of the sit. And the way that we typically do this will be sitting on some kind of a cushion or chair, and just being sure that being certain that sorry, I'm trying to make sure that this next scene is visible for everybody, that kind of thing. Typically making sure that our knees are lower than our hips so that our back can rest in a natural arc, and then finding a nice way to relax. So when you're ready, we will begin. Beginning by taking a few comfortable deep breaths and just feeling the body rise and fall. Allowing the eyes to close, or allowing the eyes to rest on a single point, if we prefer to practice with the eyes open. And taking a moment to sweep through the body to be sure we're not holding any undue tension. So starting at the top of the head, relax the brow. Relax the muscles behind the eyes, allowing the eyes to drop down just a millimeter or so, following gravity. Letting this relaxation spread to the sensations of the face, letting the face go smooth. Relaxing the back of the tongue, and letting the jaw go slack, no need to hold it closed. Relaxing the neck and the shoulders, the upper arms, forearms, wrists, and relaxing the hands. Tuning into the massive collection of nerve endings in the palms of the hands and tips of the fingers. Just observing this high definition experience of human touch. Letting go of any attempt to control the breath, just letting the body breathe as it will. Noticing the natural tightening and relaxing of the upper chest and upper back as the breath comes and goes. Relaxing the belly and the lower back. Relaxing the hips and the upper legs. The knees and calves. Relaxing the ankles. And relaxing the feet. And without needing to look for any particular sensation in the body, just a general overall filter for relaxing or pleasant sensations in the body, neutral sensations as well. Just gathering all of these together as one large collection. Letting awareness rest, simply observing the general experience of relaxing and neutral sensations in the body. And without needing to collapse down, simply bringing just a bit of attention to the sensations of the breath. Sliding over from 100% awareness of the body to maybe 80%, with 20% of our attention on the sensations of the breath. Finding a balance. Simply knowing the general sense data of the body and letting a bit of detail of the breath be known, whether it's at the rising and falling of the abdomen or the tip of the nose, wherever it's easy. And of course, at times the mind will drift. This is natural. It's the nature of the mind to explore. So simply coming back to this simple game, finding this balance between an awareness of the body and attention to the sensations of the breath. And if awareness wants to be larger, to include more data, include seeing and hearing, mental activity, whatever that is, finding that balance for ourselves. not shrinking down to the center of the bullseye. The sensations of the breath, but rather observing how the entire target, awareness, and the bullseye interdepend on each other. They support each other. Now we're going to make a slight shift, letting go of observing the breath. I'd like you to notice that this awareness has a certain quality. Notice that it doesn't need anything to be different. This awareness wouldn't change anything even if it could. It simply knows the experience it comes in contact with, whatever that is. So noticing that there's part of our experience that doesn't need anything to be different at all. And if we can, resting in that neutrality, resting in that freedom from a need. Treating that quality of awareness, of it not needing things to be different, as a kind of home, someplace we can rest. Finally, an experience free from the endless cycle of needing, wanting. While this may seem a little strange, just identifying just a bit with that awareness. This is, perhaps we could call, true being. Intentionally allowing it to have a bit of identification. This is me. This is a more clarified experience of I. can be fruitful to place identity here because there's not a lot of space for it. So notice if there is part of us that would change this experience if it could. If it had a magic wand and could make any aspect of this current experience be different. Make the meditation be different. Make our bodily, emotional, mental experience be different. It would change it. Notice if we detect anything like this. We may notice it seems a bit more like a common experience of self. This is a common experience of me. The part of us that would change our experience is often an expression of a self. So if that's arising, noticing what it's like to experience self clearly. The system telling us that this is me, my experience. I wish this or that were different. And then sliding back to observe that experience. Just noticing it as another phenomena arising in an ordinary human body mind along with the rest. Sliding back to the part of our experience that doesn't need anything to be different. Sliding back to this awareness that simply knows whatever experience is arising, including any arising of self. Noticing if this experience is different. And now we're going to make another slight transition. Transitioning this from an insight practice to a nurture positive practice. So from the position of this neutral awareness, we're going to find a phrase that would soothe or meet the needs of this self that may be arising. And the good news is that if any part of us is resisting the process, we say kind words such as, "May you be peaceful," or "I love you." If some part of us resists, pushes back, perhaps mentally says, "This is dumb," or emotionally just pushes the experience away, this is excellent. This is good news. This means this particular self is coming to the surface. So letting this awareness continue to find a phrase that would soothe this self. So we pick a phrase, direct it towards this particular self. See if it soothes or activates. If it soothes, excellent. Keep going. If it activates, also excellent. Develop sensory clarity about that self. Knowing that selves typically have very simple needs. Almost like the fundamental needs of a child. Maybe it simply wants to feel safe or heard. Maybe it simply wants to know that there's someone there. So while this self may protest, "This is dumb. I don't like this," the kind awareness may reply, "I hear you. I'm right here." Finding what will meet this cell's needs. I'm right here. I'm right here. In this way, training the neutral awareness to kindly address the needs of these underlying selves. Staying with the practice, staying in stillness, allowing a tiny bit of light to enter the eyes. Again, staying in stillness, eventually allowing the eyes to rest on a single point as they fully open. And we'll end the formal practice when the bell goes silent. But letting this moment here, as we sit with our eyes open as we do much of our day, letting this particular moment be the great teacher that shows us how to bring this practice into every aspect of our life. Okay. So folks, welcome if you're just joining. Welcome if you've been here. In the chat, if you'd like to, Meditation Mind, welcome. In the chat, if you'd like to, just let us know what that was like for you, or if you'd like to let us know where you're coming from. In the chat now, I'm going to put it in our Discord. This is how to ask questions or stay in touch between streams. If you have questions for the stream, you can throw those there. And yeah. So let us know. Hello from Lexington, Kentucky. Brent. Oh, Brent, it's great to see you. Haven't seen you in a while. Welcome. Let us know what that experience was like. Give us a report. Because we're going to be chatting with Daniel, we may not have the bandwidth to address everyone's report, but there's a lot of experienced meditators here in the chat, on the stream. So if you have a question, put it in there, and there's likely someone here who can at least address it to some degree. And of course, we usually have plenty of time to chit-chat like kitty cats. Let me see here if we can get our technicals in place as we transition to our very special guest. Oh my goodness, it looks like it's working. Okay, so here we are. Okay. Daniel, will you say some words, see if we can hear you?
Hey. How y'all?
Hey, it looks like we do hear you. I just want to make sure, folks, can you see or feel Daniel as we speak? I'm pretty sure they can, but I'm double checking just in case. Yay! Thank you so much. So, very, very excited to have with us this very special guest. Daniel's a friend and a kind of mentor from a distance. Many of you know Daniel from his book, Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha, of which there is a second and expanded edition that came out recently. Daniel is a man of many talents, from singing in the soul tradition to being a master of the, I don't know if you'd consider yourself a master, but being a practitioner of the dark and neutral arts of the realms of magic, and just being an all-around fun to hang out with dude. And I wanted to have Daniel on for a few things, some specific questions, but then just to open it up to everyone. Whenever I have someone on, and whenever I'm doing ideally anything, I'm thinking about what is the context that we're meeting in. So many people have been trapped in their homes for some time, including myself, basically stuck in their own monastery of not their own choosing. And there's a big difference. It seems like we just ran this retreat with Shinzen, and there's a big difference between sort of intentional solitude and forced isolation. So we're trying to do our best to help people cultivate the former and mitigate the latter. And so a question that Raquel and I have been talking about, and this is something I want to ask you because many people may not know, or some people may or may not, that Daniel is not only all of these meditation, has all of these meditation creds, but he's also a emergency room doctor. Retired, I believe, at this point. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Retired 2 years ago.
Retired 2 years ago. And something Raquel and I have been talking about, and what we're producing and trying to work on right now, is a set of tools for people who are in the frontline medical professions, EMTs, nurses, doctors, who are working at a level of stress that even they are really potentially not even used to, seeing life and death, experiencing the potential of great harm to themselves and their families just through doing their own job. So trying to produce some meditation materials for those folks. And I know that stress reduction is not the thing that that is your calling card. You're not like, oh, I just want to reduce people's stress. Your interest is in the awakening realm, as is mine. And that said, as we've talked about before, we're doing this for a reason, which is to have more fulfilling lives. So I wanted to talk a little bit about if we could create tools for those kind of folks, for basically any human being who's experiencing really extreme stress and only has short periods of time to engage with this. I don't know, what do you suggest? You've been in that position. You're in a very qualified place to talk about how one might address this stuff.
Yeah. So,
and if you want to introduce yourself in any other way, please feel free.
No, that's fine. Yeah, it's good. That was all good. So the first thing I think about is the degree to which like high-end meditation techniques and all of the stuff that I spend a lot of time thinking about in my sort of formal Dharma life actually apply to a lot of that. And I think a lot of people who have some background in meditation who might be interested in your podcast and this world we're in now may also have a lot of ideas about like how to deal with stress and lots of good tips and techniques. And so weirdly enough, I actually am going to fall like far to the farther end of the spectrum to provide some additional perspectives that you might not have expected. And perspective number one is skillful distraction is totally fine. Right? So I don't think that people simply need to face the suffering and deconstruct it into its momentary particulate experience or do any of the high-end meditation stuff that I routinely talk about, particularly if they're on the front lines and they have very limited time and they need some breaks from that. So like, things in moderation is really important. And it's easy when you're being traumatized to sort of take meditation and re-traumatize yourself with it. So I would actually recommend for a lot of people, actually the reverse, giving yourself permission to watch funny cat videos or just play with your puppy or whatever raises oxytocin and serotonin in your brain temporarily and gives you some respite, because a lot of the ideals of meditation are that we must face our suffering. We should always be looking within. And I'm not sure that's actually always true. And so I would be give yourself permission to watch funny movies, to read trash romance novels, to do those basic things to get you through this. This is a really unusual situation. Hopefully it will not last too terribly many months. And I think unusual times sometimes call for some unusual measures. It's not like I would make any of those necessarily habits that have to persist out afterwards all the time, but still taking some breaks and some downtime and just figuring out what gets your mind off what you've had to do all day to let it rest and heal and build up some happy neurotransmitters, I think is a really good idea. So that's actually the first point. And sort of dismissing some of the ideals that, oh, I must face my suffering. If you have any of those, and if you don't, cool. But a lot of people actually do, because I end up facing a lot of those questions. So that would be the first thing I would think about. Thoughts?
And yeah, I just wanted to jump in there is because when I'm thinking about this, I was thinking, well, I want to talk about this idea of this project we're working on, which is developing tools for these folks. And, this live stream is not just medical professionals. So how the heck does this apply to, regular people? And then the other topic I want to talk about after is tools around the dark night. And what I think is very interesting for me is that often we just forget how all of these things overlap. And what you're saying is also something when you say when I work with people who are entering dark night material, where I'm like, yeah, like you are chilling out, right? Like you don't think that like your salvation will only appear on the cushion. Like, are you getting exercise? Are you getting sleep? Do you have friends? You have therapy? All of this stuff is it's funny. We could just come up with a set of formulas for these medical professionals, and there's a solid likelihood that this might just directly apply to folks who are in that kind of dark night material. So I don't know if that rhymes with you. Of course, there's people who have technical meditation skills. They also have a different vocabulary, but yeah.
Yeah, actually, even the people with technical meditation skills, if someone calls me up and they're all dark nighty, or just having a really hard time in their practice for whatever reason, life circumstances or something, or some mix of those, then actually that's all stuff I ask about first. Like, what's your social support network? Like, what do you do for exercise? What's your diet like? Of course, all the stuff you mentioned. Do you have a history of depression? What's worked for it before? Do you have creative projects you work on? What gives your life meaning? Because if all of those aren't in place, it is usually harder to do the higher end stuff. Yeah. That's not always true. There are people who don't have any of that, all that well done, and yet still plunge into the deep end fine sometimes. Okay, so, but that said, those are all things I would still think about because they're a critical sort of foundation and support to a lot of the deeper work. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, I really appreciate that. And I think that what you said about permission, I have to remind myself, I remind students all the time, but I remind myself that, bearing down is not the whole path. It's skillfully knowing bearing down and backing off. And like you said, re-traumatizing yourself is a major danger in people who are experiencing the dark night or any of this material, that you're just facing it and just like pressing into it is actually the answer, when exactly like you said, it's really to permit yourself and say, you know what, it's actually skillful right now to watch cute, like you said, watch cute cat videos, play a video game, like whatever it is, like that's actually skillful. And I think that the mild or major trauma, for me at least, will arise when I do both. When I do the sort of relaxing thing, but I'm also, there's that self inside saying, no, 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 you shouldn't be doing this. And that sort of like micro violence that like I can't actually ever even rest. I can't actually fully, goof around with Raquel and like make silly sounds or something like that. That I actually am half in and half out. And it's the permission side seems very important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's some of the stuff I think about. And then I also think about like, because what we're going through is traumatic, right? This is trauma on a grand scale. Mm-hmm. Most of us are not thinking about the air we breathe as possibly being lethal. That's a sort of next level stuff, or we could touch a doorknob and die from it or something. I mean, that's way outside of the realm of normal. And in this situation, there will be lots of little sort of, that in of itself is kind of little micro violences from our environment, from and sort of micro traumas, and those add up. And particularly if you're working in healthcare. So one of the curious things that I found for myself is that I simultaneously acquired an unbelievably thick skin to handle bad things. I've seen a staggeringly large number of bad things in my emergency medicine career. And yet, the kind of things that people seeing them once might have been years of therapy or PTSD stuff. And yet somehow in emergency medicine, it's, or some other frontline healthcare job, or, ICU worker, or wherever you're working right now, that's seeing the impact of this. You've had to become tough to do what you do. And that said, the notion that it isn't slipping through and that there isn't a price for that is also not true. And I don't want to script anybody into having a hard time, but recognizing that this may require additional levels of trauma coping skills that you haven't acquired, even as good as your trauma coping skills might be, or recognizing that some sort of constant little micro assaults on your well-being can actually stack up. And so learning what the symptoms of trauma are, so learning about the sleep stuff, the social isolation, the slipping into less skillful coping mechanisms, the embarrassment that you're not supposed to feel these things if you're a frontline person, and not recognizing that nearly everybody around you is also feeling stress in a way that they're not telling you, or recognizing when your humor is providing you clues that maybe that's a great way to blow off some steam, but also there's some darkness there you need to deal with. Not that I'm not a fan of dark humor. That's kind of one of the ways we get by, right? It's a mature coping mechanism. But learning a little bit more about trauma in terms of not like how to manage, trauma patients, but how to your own internal trauma. So there's a cool book by David Treleaven with Willoughby Britton. Willoughby's a friend, and it's called Trauma Sensitive Mindfulness.
I didn't even know Willoughby was on that. I realized I knew the book, but I didn't. Oh, that's great. Jeez.
Yeah, so it's David Treleaven with Willoughby Britton. She had anyway, you can feel her handiwork on it, and
It's great.
she's, I think, part of the introduction in some, anyway. So I don't know her exact contribution, but she's part of the group that created that. And it's got a lot of cool tech in it. It's actually, they sort of, one slight downside to it is they kind of think of it as new tech. It's not actually new tech, right? So previous people like the Grofs, Christina and Stanislav Grof, actually did a bunch of work on this kind of stuff in the 70s and 80s. So, and they're sort of forgotten. So if you want to look back, particularly if you're of a slightly older generation, it might have a little more cultural resonance with you in some ways, and some things you might be more used to. It sometimes can read slightly dated if you're a bit younger, but you still might find it interesting to get the history of how we came here. And it's books like The Stormy Search for the Self, which talk about the ups and downs on the spiritual path and how to handle some of that stuff from a sort of very different point of view. So it's got a lot of Freudian psychology in it and some sort of boomery New Age references that if you're kind of younger sometimes might read a little weird. They do to me, and probably even stranger to like a millennial. But that said, it's still useful stuff, and you'll get a sense of the history of this and some of the depth of this, and hear it in through some different voices, which sometimes you might actually resonate with better somehow. And so drawing on that, some of that material, and if you've got some commute time, you can listen to it as an audiobook or whatever, might be helpful, because there's actually some really useful pointers in there of how to figure out how to go in to what you're feeling without just re-traumatizing yourself, and to figure out the signs of like subtle dissociation or subtle depersonalization, right? So, and just recognizing that some of our tricks on the spiritual path that can feel very equanimous can also be a little bit dissociative. And it's not like some of that might not be protective, and maybe you need that. I'm not actually saying dissociation is all bad either, but just there's this sort of funny, it's a gray zone where on the one hand you have just pathological dissociation, which is just simply not helpful. You're simply totally checking out from your life, and maybe that's better than whatever worse reaction you might have had. Like that's an extreme defense mechanism that the body needs. And then on the other hand, you've got high states of like, sort of, emptiness and equanimity and things that also feel very sort of transcendent. And exactly which is what sometimes, I wouldn't obsess about that too much, but just recognizing that some aspects of feelings of transcendence, if you're doing them in the face of a lot of stress, may have subtle aspects of dissociation. And I'm not saying that may not be helpful in the short term. Maybe that's what your body and brain needed to do. Cool. But just learning to recognize some of that stuff so it doesn't sort of become a substitute for the more genuine spiritual articles. And is at least, if you're using dissociation or depersonalization or some of these things as a temporary coping strategy, that you have some awareness that that's going on, and maybe even some temporary permission to go, okay, maybe I need some of that right now. Cool. But just recognize that if it became a habit, and they mentioned cases where people have been diagnosed with high spiritual attainments even by teachers, when really they were just kind of dissociating and rationalizing it. And so just some awareness of that is also maybe important. And that applies as much to people with high-end meditation practices who are all being traumatized by this somehow, as it does people on the front lines.
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And it reminds me of this fact that like it's not like the meditative experiences are some special outside thing coming in like on top of our, regular, boring, dumb, sense experience. It's just the same material, just often arranging itself differently or becoming more spacious or aligned in certain patterns. So disassociation is likely going to be part of that somewhere in there. And there's actually, I remember talking to friends who, there's many stories of people learning to meditate, and they learn to meditate from early childhood, sort of like, oh, my parents were screaming and I just paid attention to the sensations in my hand and suddenly everything quieted down. And so that's all I do now. I just pay attention to the sensations in my hand and everything quiets down. And these things are useful to a degree. And I appreciate that you're saying, know their use and know their hindrances, know where they're actually blocking us. Yeah. And one pro tip, I've learned this from my current therapist, who I love very much. I was basically, I would get, you're in therapy, you're talking about some hard stuff and you're just getting sleepy. You're just like, oh, well, which is mild disassociation. There you go. If you ever had the experience of being quite stressed and the response is, getting sleepier, that's everyone disassociates to some degree. But he's pointed out that the brain can't prioritize hand-eye coordination it prioritizes hand-eye coordination over disassociation. So toss a ball back and forth from one hand to the other, and you'll watch the system just brighten up. This is for mild disassociation. You watch the system just brighten up, and you can step out of it, which is helpful if you don't want that to have to be something that is there. So along those lines, just as a random tip, do you have things like that you've used in the past when you've been in sort of those situations? Skillful distraction sounds like one. And practice-wise, what would you do when you were, in these situations, these long, huge long hours, seeing some of this stuff that, like you said, I've heard you describe some of these things before, and hearing you can hear that there's, it's okay to feel pain, like
yeah.
And you've described some of the stuff before, and it's there's clearly a trace of pain there versus an unconscious sort of overwhelming trauma. But what are some of the things and strategies that you've used to process some of this stuff throughout your life?
So the other thing I'm going to talk about is walking practice, because actually, it turns out anything that gets you that right-left hemisphere back and forth, like EMDR, right, is doing that same thing, like a ball, hand-eye coordination, moving your eyes back and forth, or walking practice. So I actually think walking practice is awesome and should be done more, particularly in these stressful times where we're stuck at home. Pacing is perfectly reasonable. And people say, oh, I shouldn't pace. That's a sign of nervousness. No, that's how your body processes nervousness. It's actually trying to get you to do something that actually helps it work through in some way. So pacing is actually good. Could it become a thing and a problem? I don't know, maybe. But for most of us, we need more walking. We need more exercise. And that back and forth of right foot, left foot is actually extremely helpful for processing this. And sitting gets all the, it's got all the images and the icons, and you very rarely see walking meditation have anything like the same level of mythos. But my most important insights actually came while walking. I've done thousands of hours of walking practice. I highly recommend it. I do it as part of my daily practice. And it helps not only get us moving and produce good brain chemicals and process trauma, but it's an easy gimme. Like, these sensations are just as impermanent and not self and whatever as sitting sensations, and easier, right? Because it's moving, your eyes are open. Like, how can people blow this? And yet they do. But so give it that same level of care, because it's just as good from an insight point of view. It actually helps process trauma. And it grounds you in the space that you're in, if you're paying attention to the space you're moving in. And sometimes our inner worlds are not entirely our friends when they're just dark, right? And if you close your eyes in a seated position or something, very rapidly we find ourselves in our inner world. And it's not like I haven't done a lot of that meditation too, and consider that exploration extremely important. But sometimes just remembering that most of the space you're walking in is fine. There's the hallway, there is your bedroom, there's whatever it is, your living room, wherever you're walking, or your garden, or wherever you're allowed to walk these days. And it's fine. Most of the sensations coming in they're okay. They're just colors and, walls and flowers and sky or ceiling or whatever, windows, body, feet. They're okay. They're fine. And remembering that okayness, that, that's all fine. And maybe some thoughts and feelings are not so fine. Okay, cool. That's a part of the mix. Great. But recognizing that most of it is just like, it's totally cool. And maybe 99% of your experience is totally cool. And just sort of tuning into that and recollecting that with that back and forthy sort of motion that does that trauma release, EMDR, ball in both hands, dissociation busting thing. So I highly recommend that kind of practice. And by the way, not to divert from I actually had a long discussion of some of these tips and tricks and some other stuff actually over at Guru Viking. So if you want to go to Guru Viking and check out that podcast, we had a long discussion of some other coronavirus and coping tips and tricks. So I don't have to repeat all that information. But these are some of those. And I think, that's a practice that I think is just a really good one.
Excellent. And so if anyone has that link, just put that in the chat now. And if you're watching this on replay, I'll put that in the video description below. There's a lot of great content there. And Guru Viking is doing an entire series on strategies and skills that we might use in this time. And hearing you talk about that, just sort of, when you said the thing about walking where you can, it made me realize it's Raquel and I keep craving, we live in New York City, which is, definitely a hot spot. And we keep craving, nature, which we don't own a car because we live in New York City. So it makes me think about this thing about these sort of needs that we have as human beings that we tend to not notice. And if people, or again, going back to your experience as a doctor, when what are some of those needs we might not notice, and how might we meet those needs if they're not readily available, like human contact is a natural need? What are the suggestions there to sort of hotwire our current experience so we can, like you said, get away from the idea that our isolated, stoic self is the good one, and all of these other human things they're below transcendence, as though we ever leave, being human. Any thoughts?
Yeah, so the first thing is recognize that nearly everybody else is lonely and wanting to reach out and having time right now. So you're not alone in being lonely. So if you're thinking, oh, I don't want to bother other people, no, they probably want to be bothered, a lot of them. I'm finding a lot more people reaching out to me, and I'm delighted to be reaching out to more people. This is actually, it's weird, like to be finding the joy in this. I know that's sort of become a popular theme, but I've actually found a lot of joy in the fact that I've gotten to reconnect with a bunch of people that I hadn't talked with in a long while, or emailed with in a long while, looked up some old friends. It's been cool, actually, in a twisted sort of way, because they're home, I'm home, it's fine. And so that's been neat. And I think this is a real time where, I think a lot of people are doing that. This is nothing new or unique to me. It's been a recurring theme of a lot of messaging. I actually want to talk to the other side of that as well. My slightly contrarian point of view is also recognize if you're in small quarters with people, you may need some downtime and alone time, right? So don't be afraid to take some time. If you're used to like a bunch of hours at work where you're just on your computer, or you're used to, being in some place, or driving, or commute time where you actually get to do a bunch of stuff, and now you're like in a small confined space with a bunch of people, recognize that you may actually need some of that downtime, but built in to curl up in a ball, to process some stuff, to put on some headphones, to just get some of your own work and space done and process some things in your own way. So if you also need that time, just be honest with the people around you. Hey, maybe I need some downtime, and have permission to recognize that may also be a thing. The thing, I'm going to talk about something I talked about with Guru Viking, because I'm going to say it again because I just think it's such important content. And that's related to the stages of grief. So one thing about getting along with people in this time is that if you have the 5 basic stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, grief, and acceptance, people in the different stages often don't get along, right? And the problem is we move constantly up and down through these stages ourselves, and maybe even have mixes of elements of them, even all going on at one time. And there's a lot of grieving going on now.
And I just want to be clear, you're saying people who are misaligned in their particular stage.
Right. So at that moment, if someone is in denial and somebody else is in anger, right, and the anger person wants to just, oh, I can't believe the administration did this, or that whoever did that, or whatever, they're getting all mad about something. And the denial person, they're not going to get along. Denial wants denial. That's their coping mechanism at that moment. That's their space. And then the anger person and the denial person are not getting along. Or the acceptance person and the bargaining person. Why are you bargaining? It's just okay. Just relax into it. It's what's going on. Like, they're not going to get along. And the grieving person and the denial person, the grieving person, the anger person, like someone who's really gotten to the place of honest crying, like someone else maybe, oh, buck up, be tough. We can, like where the other person's got honest tears. Like, just recognize which of those stages are becoming important to you at that moment. And if you're having an interaction with someone else who's clearly in a different one of those, have the meta capacity to recognize, oh, wait a second, no, they're in grief, I'm in anger, how's that gonna go? Maybe I don't need to expose them to all my anger, and just have some awareness. Or maybe there's a way they can listen to my anger in a way that doesn't sort of mess up where they are, and just honor the fact that we're all going to be in different places at different moments, and move up and down sort of cycles and cycles of deeper as it unfolds. And people have traumas and grief and our losses, and because we've all lost a lot. We've lost a sense of freedom and travel, and maybe money and stress and work and meaning, and all these things people are losing at the moment. And how that hits people and when it hits people may have radically different time courses. And just so some sensitivity to that as you're interacting with people can hopefully make a lot of these interactions go better, because otherwise people can just sort of bump up against each other, because it's very natural for us to want other people to be in the same place we are, so that we have company in that, we have a resonance for that, we have some justification for that point of view, we have other people who are...
That as a meditation sort of person, I can subject other people to my acceptance. I can be like, it's going to be fine. It's going to be okay. And like that totally wholesome way of being can actually create turbulence for people who aren't there, who are in quite a different experience.
Yeah.
It can feel very misattuned. So that actually leads a little into what I wanted to talk about, and we talked a little bit about on the phone, was this thing we've talked about before is what Raquel and I are calling the multiple self model, which tracks somewhat cleanly on top of internal family systems. And just this idea that there are these different positions or selves that arise. Each one has this quality that it tends to say, I am the one true self, and it can't really seem to look around and have any mentalizing or any sort of outside view to recognize this is a view of reality. It says this is the reality. And every time we refer back to it, it says, I've always been here. I've always been the one true self. And that's why we can have the angry self and the scared self and then the sort of neutral self. And each time we think, this has always been me, versus these very different views of reality. And the meditation we did today, before this, which, again, if you're watching the playback, we'll have a link for that below. But the meditation we did today was using this quality of awareness, which doesn't have a lot of identification, doesn't need things to be very different, as a place from which to navigate these different selves. Maybe even a conflict that's arising within us is that one part of us, one self is grieving, one self has acceptance, and internally we're like, well, how can that's not fair. And that same relationship that you're describing externally can actually be occurring internally. So just curious about if that rings any thoughts for you or anything like that.
Yeah, it's a great, someone whose poetry brain is working better than mine in this famous poem, which has the line in it, or the lines, do I contradict myself very well? I contradict myself. I contain multitudes. It's just one of these beautiful poetic lines that someone hopefully will catch the reference. I'm just blanking on the author at the moment. And Song of Myself, I don't know, Walt Whitman maybe, I'm not sure. Anyway, so yeah, the capacity to have all these different aspects of ourselves. And I'm hanging out here in a beautiful place, actually. I'm oddly lucky. I have a lot of land and a lot of space in the house where I am right now, and 5 really nice people who are all actually pretty high level in terms of consciousness, and they're meditators, and they've been on the spiritual quest for a long time. They've got a lot of coping skills, and yet we're all having to recognize, okay, wait, oh yeah, so-and-so's like needing some silence right now. Okay, cool. And so-and-so really wants to talk, or so-and-so really wants to go for a walk, and just sort of tuning in, like, what are their needs? What are my needs? How do those line up or not? Yeah, and it realized it's just going to be such a moving target. It's been so interesting to watch us all, like 1 hour, someone would just, and then all of a sudden they're just fine. Like, and you've gotten used to them being one way, and the mind can sort of like say, oh, they're that way. Not only our own minds that think about the way we are as a fixed entity, and the way I am right now is the way I've always been, and I must have this sense of continuity and coherence and non-contradictoriness, but also what we do for others. Oh, they're just angry today. Well, maybe 5 minutes ago they were angry and now they're not. And so just remembering to keep it fresh and keep checking in with the people you're with, if that's helpful, and or just sort of feel into them and like, what's their mood right now, and not pigeonhole them by the way they were just some short time ago.
Yeah. And this sort of leads into this other question that was coming up for me from your experience, you're probably, at least from as far as I know, the foremost person who has talked about and developed meditation tech and, sort of drawn the line so people can navigate through what we'll use the Christian term, the dark night of the soul aspect of the meditative path. And I'm curious about whether it does, this model that we're using, this metaphor, this model does make sense, that there are these different selves or different parts, and one self is basically things felt relatively harmonious, but then one self starts really, really experiencing and moving towards a greater expanded connection with freedom. And then there's this other self that is much more familiar and much more comfortable with safety. And then there's this turbulence between the two. One is sort of expanding, and sometimes expanding with its own momentum. We don't have control over it necessarily anymore. And another one is saying, oh, no, this is not, shouldn't go like this. We should have this solid, continuous, stable self, even if that stability is based on, fear or sort of a less, what we might think of as a less fun or free self. But this conflict is actually partially to start to this is the multiple self or internal family systems model, that the needs of both of those selves are very important and valid, and that really our job is to find a way to meet the needs of both of these so that they're not fighting each other anymore. So that's the sort of theoretical framework that I've been interested in recently. But I'm curious, for you, does that ring true? There are places where it makes sense or misaligns with your experience.
Yeah, definitely. Expanded, tranquil, peaceful, open consciousness is very much an acquired taste, but it's also nothing like a stable thing. So the natural cycle of insight is that the mind will get, more open and then more contracted and then way more open and then kind of, do stuff and then shift again and go through all these different phases and little subparts of phases. So, the fractally sort of nature of all these little sub-mind states of other mind states that maybe, like we had the contracted self and then we get some space around it. And then the contracted self sort of re-rises in that space. And then it and then, those kinds of things. And just to recognize that that's absolutely normal. So also the notion that at some point you will get all those aspects, the sort of, to suddenly go into technical language, the sort of tight, angry, paranoid, contracted, re-observational, harsh, edgy self and equanimity. They're right next to each other from an insight map point of view, right? But it's very normal to get into sort of the space of dissolution and then have it recontract in the harder end of the dark night, and then suddenly open up into equanimity and then have a little sort of a mini dark night of contraction and then to do this thing again and then to out. And then, so just recognize that the notion that there will be some static permanent resolution of those, they will suddenly not contradict each other or it'll just be expansive and the little thing will just arise in it and feel fine as a stable thing, also not a realistic ideal. And so going into this, we have to recognize there will be cycles and contractions and expansions. That's what the heart and the mind do. And just recognize that the lack of synchrony of them, sometimes they're in sync, right? And sometimes they're totally out of sync. And that's just the normal nature of oscillating things.
Yeah. And hearing you say that, it makes me realize that it sounds, sometimes I'm like, oh, that sounds so close. It's such a great metaphor. And then I get to a place in realizing, I don't know if that's a metaphor anymore. That just seems like sort of how things are, maybe. So I'm thinking about this in relationship to what you said before about our external relationships, and that there's these different sort of experiences of mourning, and there's one experiencing this and one experiencing something else, and they're just misaligned at any given time, and we get used to one, and then it shifts to another. Would it be too far of a leap, or does this just range into the realm of just theoretical kind of language on top of experience? But the actual map of grieving itself, of processing and sort of purifying our experiences, and different parts of the self, different selves actually being in states of grieving, and we might call maybe the sort of more equanimous expanded self, maybe that's acceptance. But I don't know, curious, just for fun. Any thoughts? Any thoughts on that? That actually, what we're seeing is literally the map of grieving. That one part is, if you just look at the map, one part's fearful, one part is angry and fighting back, one part is the alignment seems so clean. I'd just be curious about your thoughts there.
Yeah, it's definitely true that from a certain point of view, the insight stages do take you on a tour of the stages of grief. This has been noted again and again, right? So they are in some ways directly that. That said, there are lots of different cycles. So it's, I can watch myself, I've been doing a bunch of meditation because I'm home and I'll drop into a thing, and I've watched myself, sometimes even when I'm way up in a stage that is clearly equanimity, because seconds later the mind might converge and disappear and reappear, and in something that indicates I was in some high equanimity stage, its content could be angry, right? Or its content could be something else, right? Anywhere on the thing. And so just recognize that the stages of insight can roll through, but they're not the be all and end all of what the grieving process is by any means. And there are a whole lot of things that are cycling, and sometimes in phase and sometimes out of phase, and coming in and out, even within that progress cycle. And so just less idealism and more flow with what's going on is probably helpful.
That's great. And a theme that I hear coming up over and over in what you're saying, is basically, when we're talking to the doctors or people in the frontline medical community, people who are just having a hard time now in coronavirus, people who are in the dark night, is that there are all these different things occurring, and that we might unconsciously be pushing some part of it away, our need to like watch TV or a need to connect with people, or and basically sort of unconsciously making some of these be less sort of natural. Like, well, this, equanimity, well, that's natural, that's the way I want to go. But sort of craving or wanting or relaxing or hanging out, those things are lower, and we just want to sort of get rid of those. It sounds like you're sort of naturalizing and sort of leaning people towards accepting everything that's occurring as just sort of manifestations of nature. Does that feel accurate?
Well, and recognize that your reactions to what's happening are also the natural manifestations of nature.
Right.
So,
right.
And nobody knows exactly how to play this, and nobody can tell you exactly how to do this at each moment. So there's no science that says when you get home from some stressful shift, the optimal thing for you to do is this or that. So if you're having doubts, well, everybody else has them too. We don't know. We don't know, right? We have no idea. There's no custom tech that can say at this moment, cat videos beat deep jhana. I don't know, right? And so you just have to kind of wing it and experiment for yourself and see what's working for you at that moment, realizing it's also going to be a changing target. I wish I could give more absolutes, but also, so the notion that someone has some absolutes somewhere that would really be the super perfect formula for you as an optimized way that would bust your stress and process the trauma and allow you to maintain the perfect maximal function during these stressful times. Yeah, nobody knows that stuff.
Yeah.
I myself am really, it's funny, I don't actually do that much deep jhana practice anymore, weirdly enough. I have the skills and somehow it doesn't call to me much, except the last few days when suddenly the body's been like, I'll be, my busy day of buying food and preparing stuff and doing house tasks. And, I've only been back a few weeks and I've been gone for most of the last 2 years traveling. So the house has sort of built up this debt of things I need to do on it. And all of a sudden, like, the body will be like, no, you need to sit now. I'm like, I don't really want to sit now. No, like, that's what's going. And like, I wouldn't have known that, right? So being willing to just sort of feel into it and say, this is what I seem to need right now, and recognizing that nobody's got a better guess than that generally at that moment.
That's great. Shinzen calls that becoming your own book, where
Yeah.
you're no longer looking like to the teacher, like, well, what do I do now? What about this detail? It's like, I don't know, try it. Like,
Yeah.
give it a whirl. That's lovely. Yeah. And so, what else? Anything else that comes to mind, related or unrelated, that would be fun to talk about? I have other questions, but if you have anything floating around for you.
Yeah. So dealing with the news and politics. So I've gotten to see a lot of various reactions to both watching the news, like some people just watching it constantly. They think if they have more information, it's going to help them be prepared. Past a certain point, that's usually not true. Past the basics, most of that isn't actually true. And then to the question is, to what degree are those who traumatize themselves sometimes get fascinated by the things that traumatize themselves? So just watch that. If you're like obsessively watching the news, just like ask yourself, is this information helping, or is it just making me more scared? Or is it, some coping mechanism that maybe is not actually that skillful? It's just a question. I don't have the answers. Maybe it's totally great for you. We've got one person here at the house who's very much like sort of flipped this on its weird head and like thinking of it as like a sport that sounds totally pathological and probably kind of frightening, but it's interesting to watch. And they're like, Team USA is pulled into the lead. It's like, this is like really weird, dark, twisted humor. And yet it's sort of the way they've kind of like reframed it as like to sort of help them deal with it. Oh, so that brings me to the second point, humor. Right? So humor is one of these things, and people's weird coping mechanisms when it comes to humor. Like if you're a healthcare practitioner, watching this, you already know, right? We've got dark, twisted senses of humor that if civilians, the average public got to hear, we would all be, hauled off, to some back alley somewhere. And yet that is how we get by, right? And we understand that. And yet not everybody is going to work well with that. This is something also talked about in Guru Viking. So if you also are using humor as a mature coping mechanism, which it's typically labeled as, just recognize that your humor may not work for some other people, because in dark times, humor gets weird and dark and twisted. And some people will just find it incredibly offensive, and other people will like just, you know, laugh in a way that seems totally inappropriate for how not that funny that joke actually was, and just realize that this is just also people dealing with stress in their own way. So if you're having a humor paradigm conflict or a humor need conflict with someone at that point, just have the meta perspective to recognize what's going on. So that's another thing I would add.
That's great. Yeah, and what you were saying about the sort of treating politics as sport, it reminds me of that hat. I don't know if anyone's ever seen that hat. It has an American flag, and it says, USA, back-to-back World War champs.
Yeah.
It's like,
right.
You know, it can be this thing of like, you know, politics is sport. And also what you were saying before about like needing to know the news, I'm wondering from your perspective, what is that drive where there's this clear sense that like there's a need to know what the next horrifying thing is. If I think about, and you know, this may expose my sort of general political belief, but if I think about looking over the past number of years, there are these moments that are just horrifying. Oh my God. And there's always this sense of, I need to know the exact minuscule next little thing that feels horrifying to this body mind, and that will resolve something.
Yeah. Or somehow keep you safe.
Yeah.
When it's very unlikely to have any effect whatsoever on the politics or the situation at all. And yet somehow there are parts of ourselves that are definitely reassured by more information. Mm-hmm. And there are parts of ourselves that are just re-traumatized by more information. And both are probably going on simultaneously in all of us. And just having, again, some meta awareness of that balance and the ability to ask the question, is this traumatizing me or is this helping me? And what's going on here?
Yeah. And that seems to be a really common thing in our world today, where there's this sense that, you know, would I be better off if I didn't look at the internet or didn't look at news, or I was just sort of off in a cabin? And I think if people were honest with themselves, many people would probably say, yeah, you know, like, maybe that would be better. Maybe it would be better if I didn't check the news once a month. I check the news during this thing, or every 2 weeks or something. But for me, what happens is I say, yeah, that might be better for me, but I don't think I can do that. That's not a good idea. I'm not going to do that. And there's this momentum of that habit groove of, mm-hmm. you know, leaning towards that sort of mechanism, that coping mechanism. And it's very hard to step outside of that. So I think you're describing having enough meta awareness to know, like you said, what is actually good for you versus what the system is craving or leaning towards.
Yep, because that sort of edgy dopamine reward of, oh, the next exciting news thing, dopamine is sort of a hard taskmaster. That's the sort of the cocaine pathway, and it's kind of an edgy pathway, right? It's the speed and cocaine pathway is what makes us habitually go back to our phones and click them for that teeny little dopamine hit. It's kind of an edgy high. So just figure out also ways to get some oxytocin and serotonin to kind of balance out the chemistry. If you haven't read the book Meet Your Happy Chemicals, it's a cool book. And it sort of it's like a quick user's guide. It's pretty short, and it's a quick user's guide to how the chemistry of your brain works. And I highly recommend it because it gives you a sort of a meta capacity again to figure out how to tweak your brain chemistry based generally on social interaction and the information and stuff you put into your brain, as well as exercise and stuff.
Excellent. So Daniel, I thought maybe if you don't mind, we can transition to some questions from the folks who are showing up here in the chat. Thank you so much, folks, for being here live. If you would like to, because so many questions have flown by, if you have a question that is yours, and you feel it's an important one to address, repaste that in the chat and I can see that. And then if you have someone else's question that you think is a great question, you can vote. You can say, yeah, that person's question, etc. And just so you know, some folks are messaging us on Discord and saying, hey, I got questions here. Right now, it's just got to be in the chat of any of the sort of platforms. If you're watching this, I'm seeing most of them coming from YouTube and Twitch. So let's see. Here's one question, actually, as we sort of get ready for these to roll in. And I'm sure you've answered this a dozen times. So the simple question we can slide by, and you can point people to wherever you answered this resource, or whatever wherever that resource lies. The question is one that I'm sure you've had many times because you've used the word arahant in relationship to yourself. So I'm less interested in it's this sort of thing. It's like basically that a lot of these questions somewhere in there just boils down to prove it. It's like, oh, whoa. So I'm a little less interested in that personally than how do you define the term arahant, and how does that relate to moral achievements? Because something that's also sort of peppered around in a lot of the questions are, how is it possible? I mean, just to be honest and compassionate, part of the question is, how is it possible that this person that I love and who's changed my life could have done something ethically very misaligned? And I think
yeah, that comes up a lot in spiritual world.
Spiritual world, right? And I think part of that, for me at least, is this denial of humanity that I've yet to, maybe I'm off, but I've yet to see a human being transcend human. Just me personally.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet either.
Yeah, maybe soon, maybe tomorrow. There is that one teacher who teaches the one true, one good teaching, and they're gonna, if I just listen and do their instructions exactly as they describe, then we'll finally get to that perfection. So I'm wondering if you can address that kind of cluster around how do you define arahant, and how does that relate to the sort of vertical of moral achievement?
Yeah, so going back to frame this in terms of the three trainings to start with, because there's going to be some conflict there. So the three trainings are, sila or shila, samadhi, and panya or prajna. And so that's morality, concentration, wisdom, or ethical behavior, concentration, wisdom, insight, however you want to define the words. I'm just going to use morality, concentration, wisdom. Sorry if you don't like those translations. And so they each have totally different assumptions, right? So training in morality begins with the assumption that I am a stable person, that my past is a real past, that my future is a real future, karma is a real thing happening to a real individual, that other people are real individuals, that my actions and their deeds will carry forward. It's its own training. It has its own set of things you practice. It has precepts. It has ethical guidelines. It has advice on how to handle your mind and psychology. It's basically everything to do with relative ordinary behavior in terms of body, speech, and mind. So this is psychology. This is philosophy. This is relative truths. This is all skillful actions. It's this extremely broad catch-all category. And being so incredibly broad, it's everything from your vocation to how you speak, to your relationships, to your interaction with society and the legal system and all of that. It's gigantic, and consequently is utterly unmasterable, right? It's so incredibly large that the notion that we could always know exactly the right thing to say in every situation and know all the karmic implications of that and know how the other person will take it and know how to skillfully navigate every situation we'll find ourselves thrown into as we continue to get older and mature and find ourselves in new situations we've never been in or even ever expected to be in. The notion that anybody will have all of that totally locked down as we've mastered this is just it's incomprehensible that could occur. I know no one who's ever done it. I don't even know how it would be done. It theoretically baffles the mind to imagine one could have all that in-house. So that's that. And then insight has a totally different set of assumptions and agendas. It's three characteristics. It's six sense doors, however they arise, whatever is arising. This moment is the only moment. There are no beings even, much less separate beings. There's colors, sounds, shapes, textures, feelings. They arise and vanish in this moment. They're utterly transient. They disappear. Intentions arise naturally rather than there being a doer. Mental impressions that are the little mental things we remember and seem, like when you have noted something or, whatever, that's a little mental impression. Those are just more things that arise emptily, immediately, now, based on, in theory, some sort of causality. But really, they're just transient things occurring in this instant. That's a radically different set of assumptions. And curiously enough, this training you actually can master. If you spend enough time noticing that intentions arise like thoughts, right? So everybody, when they sat down on the cushion the first time, they noticed that thoughts just arise, right? It's Insight 101. The first thing you notice is, wait, I can't control my thoughts. What the hell? You might have noticed this before, but it becomes super obvious literally with the first meditation sit. My thoughts are a mess. I can't control them or barely control them. There's incredibly loose relationship between the sense of myself and thoughts. They're all changing. How can they be me? And yet I feel my thoughts are me. And yet they're just happening, just spinning onwards, noise mostly. It's embarrassing. And yet it turns out intentions, which are the little mental thoughts that occur before actions, have that same quality. So the intentions to do things also arise. And if you learn just to clearly perceive them, like you perceived other thoughts arise on their own, thousands of times, if you're a meditator, how many times did your mind wander? You no control of it, you brought it back. Well, it turns out intentions are the same way, but it takes some more mental clarity to notice that. And once you start to notice that the intentions that occur before all actions, even before thoughts, I'm going to think a long, complicated thought. Well, there was the intention that arose in a moment that already had the content, I'm going to think a long, complicated thought, right? So I'm going to do it again. I'm going to think a long, complicated thought. Well, I already knew I was going to do it when the intention, or I'm going to think a long, see. And so those little intentions are these little, very dense informational packets, but experientially, they're very, very subtle. They're very, very subtle in comparison to most thoughts, and they're very subtle in comparison to the actions that they lead to. But with a well-trained mind, they can become more clear. And when, just like anything, it's just like you start, playing scales on a guitar, and the first time it's like, and the second time it's like, and then eventually you can play a scale. And in the same way, as you learn to, or like learning to type or learning to read, the first time you saw letters, you didn't know what they meant. And then you slowly learned an A was an A and a B was a B, and then you learned CAT spells cat. And now, when you look at the word cat, I assume everybody looking at this, if you speak English and read, like you can't see the word cat and not have cat already be functionally in your brain. It's just hardwired. It becomes natural. There's no way to unsee it once you've seen it, right? There's no way to have the letters CAT arise and not have the meaning cat occur in your mind. It's automatic. And in that same way, eventually with practice, learning to see intentions arise, just as more natural things occurring in space, like everything is naturally, lawfully occurring and disappearing in space. So that can just become hardwired as one's default. And eventually, with enough practice, it just flips over, and then you can't unsee it. You can't think there's a doer anymore, because the experience of intentions just arising in space is so naturally clear. And this is not weird or esoteric or far out there. This is just this thing that undoes the illusion of a doer. And this can actually be known for yourself. So more interesting than has this guy done it, you can do this. So you do this, prove it to yourself, check out your experience. Do intentions arise naturally? Can you notice them and see, is there really a doer? And you'll find out for yourself, no, actually there isn't. It seemed like there was one, kind of, sort of, to the degree that you seem to sometimes have control of what you were doing. But as tons of us have noticed, even like our actions, how much control do we actually have of all of them? We can do all kinds of stuff, taking a whole shower and not even remember if we washed our feet or whatever, right? And yet somehow you washed your feet, or you didn't, you don't know. You weren't even there for it, and yet somehow the whole shower occurred or whatever. You drove to work and you were just lost in thought. You didn't even pay attention. You didn't notice most of the drive, and yet all these complicated actions were coordinated. Well, it turns out all actions have that same quality. In the same way, mental impressions, so the mental impressions that seem to be a knower, right? So there's the experience, and then there's the coarse mental impression we make of it. Experience, coarse mental impression. And this really in here seems to be the knowledge rather than this. Like, here's the hand, right? There's all these sensations here. And then somewhere in here, there's like the little mental picture of the hand, which is nothing like the complexity or intricacy or density of the hand information. It's just, when I remember, like I go, and then I close my eyes and remember doing that. Well, I kind of know what I did, but it's not, the experience of that is nothing like this. And so the notion that this is a knower, right? Rather than these things each just knowing themselves, this thing just, this disc just knowing itself, whatever, this cloth just knowing itself right here, these sensations right here are just these sensations right here, very straightforwardly. And if you pay enough attention, you can notice, well, these are actually just sensations that know themselves here, and mental impressions just know themselves here. And again, eventually it becomes just right, like reading. You can't unsee it. You just know this is the way the mind works or experience works. And so the sense of the knower actually gets dissolved. And then if you pay enough attention to impermanence, to change, right? as everybody notices, the first time you sit down, I can't make anything stay. I can't make a pleasant state stay. You can't make anything stay. My mind's all over the place. It's moving around. Things are changing. Well, yeah, that's the point. Everybody notices this, and that can be taken far enough. So eventually you can't imagine there's actually a stable thing in this, right? You can't find it. You've looked, you've tried. Where's the stable thing? And eventually, in the same way that you can't see CAT cat without that automatic understanding of it meaning cat coming in the same way, eventually you can't experience anything and think it's a stable thing. That just gets hardwired written on the brain. However, the simple fact of that level of direct sensate clarity doesn't suddenly rewrite all cultural conditioning. No, cultural conditioning is powerful, as the social scientists will all tell you, as the social constructionists or deconstructionists or whatever will all tell you. Like, it's powerful. So, our biology is powerful, as the biologists and the behavioralists will all tell you. It's incredibly powerful. As the people who study mammals will tell you, we're mostly just mammal, right? And a little bit human, right? Our brain is mostly this ancient, sort of even kind of proto-reptilian structure with very powerful limbic system and chemical drives and all this stuff. And civilization and the frontal lobes, as we think of it, and the sort of cortex, is this very thin veneer over a brain that has incredibly powerful systems of reward and punishment built into it. And so the notion that somehow we're just going to suddenly transcend all of that incredibly powerful biology and social conditioning by understanding that intentions arise naturally in space and the mental impressions arise naturally in space and are not actually the actual knowledge of the sensations they're a representation of, or that this body is transient, will suddenly undo all of that. Well, that's just mythical thinking, right? That's just not true. And so I think of each of these as distinct trainings, each of which requires their own work. Mastery in one guarantees nothing about mastery in others. I know some super, super moral, just perpetually nice, good people who I've worked with for years, known for decades, and they're just solid citizens, true mensches, right? They're just great people, usually, as far as I can tell. I don't know what they're like in private, but in public, like they're just solid citizens. They do a great job, and yet they may have no obvious insights. They can't tell you that an intention, naturally follows all actions, or the world is utter empty transience, or whatever. They've got none of that, and yet they're really moral people. And I know some other people who have serious insight and concentration chops, deep jhanas, deep capacity for meditation. Their morality trip, if you really got to know them, is pretty screwed up, even as nicely as they might present in public. And that's disappointing. But imagining that the one skill set translates to the other skill set is just delusion. And it gets demonstrated so often. Right? I mean, how many Dharma scandal sheets do you need to read to see the pattern? I mean, this is nothing new, and it's disappointing, right? It's incredibly disappointing because it's typically sold, if we just understand impermanence, we'll suddenly be super nice people. Except, the causality doesn't line up, unfortunately. Do these things relate to each other somehow? Yeah, I'm being a little stark in my categorization and separation. It's true that morality practice helps with insight. Insight can influence morality, but the notion that they're fundamental, transformative to each other is just delusional. And the insight I give, so the example I use all the time, would you assume that a great author was, of course, a great concert pianist, or that a great concert pianist was, of course, a great author? Here are people who hit key sequences that have meaning to people and can evoke emotions with a high degree of precision, right? To invoke, to a feeling or a quality in their audience who's listening to or reading what they're doing. But of course, great concert pianists are not great authors, and great authors are not great concert pianists, despite how incredibly close those skill sets would seem. And understanding impermanence versus a nice person, like those aren't anything close to each other in terms of a skill set, right? They're vastly farther away. I understand suffering and suddenly I'm like really good at speaking well. Like, what's the logic? I don't like, and yet we assume that, even for the super close example of the concert pianist and the author, we go, of course, that's crazy, right? We know. And yet somehow that basic logic, that basic adult reasonable reality testing thinking often is just thrown out the window in face of the glory of spiritual advertising and people presenting incredibly well in public. So I know plenty of people who give fantastic Dharma talks and they're so slick in their presentation, and they've got such a reassuring presence, and their voice is so incredibly nice. Who in private, yeah, really different from that, but they've got a persona. So just always recognize the show aspect, right? When someone seems too good to be true and they seem too polished, well, they're on stage. Just recognize that they're on stage with you. There's a public persona that they're bringing to this, right? And we all do that, right? So nobody's going to be as totally honest in a recorded video live stream thing, even as they would be like, you know, at home with their spouse or something, right? I mean, like, just different worlds. Just be aware of that. And I try to be basically myself, you know, sort of a little rough and goofy, but like, you know, even I, like, it's impossible not to edit somewhat for public consumption. It's just like, it's hardwired. And so even my best attempts to do that, I still fail. And just recognize everybody else is failing too in that regard, to be perfectly honest in public situations in their public presentation, no matter how hard they're trying.
Yeah, that's great. I really appreciate that. And just to the small piece, and if you want to point someone to a resource where you describe this, that's fine too. We can just link it. Your definition of arhant.
Yeah, so the definition of arhant is that person who has hardwired that intentions automatically just are another thing arising in space and disappearing, that mental impressions aren't the true knowledge of the actual ham. These sensations are here, these sensations are here, they arise and vanish. And so an arhant has hardwired that, so it's now, you can't not see it. It's unignorable. It's at a baseline that it's not a reflective thing. It's just literally hardwired into the sensate perceptual mechanism. Like, yeah. I don't have any capacity to reconstruct the illusion of solidity. It's just gone. Yeah. A thought of solidity can arise, but even that is just a transient thought of solidity that arises. There's no way to not see that. And that's just become hardwired to the deepest levels of perception. That stopping of the process of creating those illusions has stopped and stayed stopped. So the process hasn't started again. Yeah. And so that's how I define arhatship. And it turns out there's plenty of justification for that across a lot of traditions anyway. Yeah.
And it sounds like, and this is, if you look at the language, there's often careful uses of language where they say, you know, free from the hindrance of, you know, lust or anger, this kind of thing. But it doesn't necessarily say that that doesn't arise. I mean, there are cases where it actually says it literally will not arise, that the truly enlightened being can't, you know, get aroused or something like that.
You see both in the text.
You see both.
There's a contradictory tradition. So you see some of the higher quality stuff and some of the lower quality stuff, just like the polycanon, right? The polycanon is a mixed bag in terms of quality. And if you talk to like the super poly heads, they'll tell you which the things they think are really authentic and true and which ones aren't. And we can all make our own designations of exactly how we want to split that, you know, justify our trips or whatever. But this at least is verifiable for yourself. So if you practice to the degree that there's no way to have a true sense of a doer, knower, controller, beer. And once that's hardwired and it persists across all mind states, times, years, okay, cool. That's what I call this thing. And if you do that and it doesn't, you're like, no way, man, this isn't it. I don't like it. But you've actually done that and you want to go do something else or learn something else, cool, obviously, go do that. But otherwise, just see for yourself. This is straightforward. It's not esoteric or weird. It's doable. It's straightforward instructions. It's simple. It's boring. It's not flashy. And yet I found it very transformative.
And I guess a sort of an extension of that question is, then if you can see it as something that's just arising, something that's just coalescing or organizing itself out of the raw sense data of, you know, human body mind, why then would you shape that into the form of fooling around with your students, for instance? So how could that happen if someone is seeing that form, if that makes sense?
So the first question is, to what degree is that true that these people actually have that level of realization? So this gets pretty snotty where one teacher sort of casts aspersions on another person's possible levels of realization.
And I just want to...
Right, so that's where you suddenly get into like the sort of, it can...
Get sticky, yeah.
Yeah, it can get sticky. So just, I recognize that, but since you asked the question, I'll go there just realizing this is a politically touchy mess. And it's a small pool we all swim in, right?
Well,
so like...
I just want to mention, so it's another factor that, well, maybe they aren't as awakened as they say they are. Let's eliminate that one for now, just because of course that's the case. We're saying is it possible, and we've said, so what you said so far, it is possible that someone could act immorally and yet have a very, very deep transformation. So how is that possible? Just assuming whoever does have X attainment, how could that be possible if they had that level of attainment that they would still choose to do something that would potentially cause themselves and others pain outside of this present moment, which they're actively deconstructing?
Yeah, so just realize that even within the question, you've used two totally different frames. So there's something here called a category error. On the one hand, you say the arhat who, and just the simple fact of the word arhat means no choice, naturally unfolding causality, right? No chooser, no doer, no beer. They're actually not making choices. The universe is just unfolding.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is, how does the naturally unfolding universe lead to the things that the naturally unfolding universe unfolds to? Just because otherwise you're saying, how does something that doesn't exist, makes no choices, and has no sense of will or sense of being a separate self that's making choices, in that sense, actually choose to do this? Just so we're making sure because if you set up the first part of the question with one set of assumptions, which are the assumptions of arhatship, and then you set up the second part of or wisdom, and then you set up the second part of the question with the assumptions of morality, how does this individual then make a choice? Because morality assumes will, it assumes choice, it assumes consequence, it assumes separate beings, it assumes karma, it assumes past and future, none of which insight training does. So just recognize you've got an inherent tension in the question. But ignoring that, remember that mammal thing? So the naturally unfolding universe of mammals wanting to reproduce or, top up their brain chemicals, that's a thing. That is part of the very, very powerful conditioning of the naturally unfolding universe. Unfortunately, that's really disappointing, but that's also really honest. The second thing is the temptations and the corruptions of power, right? So power is extremely corrupting, and it is incredibly common for people who rise up the cushion to start getting into these super pathological feedback loops of transference and countertransference, that whatever the person says is suddenly praised. When they get up on the cushion, their decisions are worshipped as being somehow superior. And that transference comes from their delusional but very encouraging and fascinated students. And then as countertransference, right? So anybody, like, people start believing it because they believe it, so maybe it's true of me. And if you think that's not true of enlightened beings, well, I'm sorry, it still is. So countertransference is still a serious problem. And as soon as you start to rise up on the pedestal, transference and countertransference start to kick in, and that conditioning becomes more and more pathological. And so some people really like the transference. Oh, I've got the perfect, wonderful guru, and I praise them, and they give me the wonderful teachings. Well, as soon as you're doing that, maybe that really helps you and reaches you as a student, but realizing it's just a matter of time pretty much for most of these kids before that becomes seriously screwed up. And any whim they have seems okay, because they're this perfect, amazing, wonderful thing. Any desire they have seems okay. Any need they have seems okay. Their followers are providing them with the food they like and the cushions they like, right? And then we get into the next thing of the sort of alpha thing, the alpha glow, right? So the alpha glow, we as pack animals, the alphas get a glow to them. And then this happens with all kinds of sexes and sexual orientations. But I'm just going to, for the purposes of simplicity and hitting the big thing that happens most of the time, right? So regardless of all of that, it's true this happens in all kinds of different sexual pairings and orientations and whatever, but by far the overwhelming majority is the powerful male with the worshipful female, the powerful male alpha with the worshipful female alpha. And as, say, Monica Lewinsky and Bill Clinton show, there's something very powerful in that dynamic. Natural is a funny word for it, but maybe natural in some way that everybody doesn't like and doesn't want to acknowledge, maybe just a part of something in human conditioning where women wish to breed with powerful males or something. I can't even imagine the comments I'm going to get for this, right? Like it could be a total crap show in your comment fest, so I apologize. I realize this is sensitive stuff. That said, there's something in that conditioning. There is also something predatory in male minds and testosterone. Let's just acknowledge that, right? Males are the vast majority of violent criminals, the vast majority of rapes, the vast majority of all that. And if you think that just understanding impermanence eliminates all of that deep, powerful, shadow, lizard, primal, reproductive, fucked up, whatever, sorry for the language, conditioning you want to call that, pick whatever labels you need. The notion that this certainly eliminates all the problems of testosterone and male reproductive conditioning and male power dynamic stuff, that's just simply not true, right? So you put all these dynamics together, and probably others I haven't even mentioned, and it's just a matter of time before people are going to do things that are socially untoward, like they do all the time in all kinds of other situations just like this, in jobs, in politics, in families, like, among friend groups, in cults, right? Because all these things, spirituality ends up intrinsically being pretty culty. It's just this nature. Like all of these things have some sort of cult appeal to it, right? And so trying to bring as much light to that as we can, there's just cult dynamics in spiritual marketplaces. And anytime there's, how could this perfect awakened being, as soon as you're saying that, you're in a delusional transference and countertransference cult situation. Literally the asking of the question is telling you the answer, right? Because that setup means you've got serious delusion about how this whole human thing works. You've got delusion about the mammal thing. You've got delusion about pack dynamics. You've got delusion about alphas and betas. You've got delusions about the sort of golden glow that people get and how it's just natural for people to exploit that. You have delusions about the power of testosterone to make the brain do bad stuff, right? And if you think testosterone doesn't make people do bad things, watch the news any day, every day. Read the police blotter any day, every day, any town, always. This is a thing. Here we are. Welcome to the human race, kids.
So, okay. So this gets back to this sort of what you were describing before as the language issue, when you're using a language that's built to, that unconsciously fortifies selves and this kind of thing. And you're trying to describe a function that doesn't
consciously fortifies them, right?
Yeah,
I have no problem using the language of selves.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's that. And then there's this ongoing doing that, unfolds as a natural experience. So the ongoing doing that is the sort of experiential expression of what we might call arahant. There could still be in that functioning the unconsciousness of acts which harm a community or acts which are blind to certain things. And you're saying that somewhat that unconsciousnness,
or even aware of those things, right?
So you're saying
people know don't fuck your students, right? They know that. They know don't molest people. They know don't tell them lies about spiritual transmission to get into their pants.
But it always seems like what
decade are we living in that they don't know those things and aren't conscious that they're doing something some part of their brain knows, right? I mean, this is nothing new.
Well,
right?
it's some part. That's the thing, is that almost universally there's this level of conviction that actually they were serving. Almost always it's like, no, this was an altruistic thing. I did the right thing by X, Y. It's like really, and they're shocked that like other people don't understand that. So
our capacity to rationalize is staggering. Never underestimate it.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Okay. So I want to both be respectful of your time. Daniel, I was joking with Daniel. I was like, we're only going to go 5 hours. And Daniel's like, let's go. So, but I want to also be aware of all the great questions that are coming in from folks and the recognition that we can't get through everything. It's just a fact. So someone Standard sent over a question, which was a super chat on YouTube, which if folks are giving donations wherever, just know that all the donations from this stream are going to be donated to, I forget the name of it, but it's a fully reputable charity related to helping folks related to COVID. So I don't take donations for the Dharma ever. So if you're looking to give me a Dharma donation, cool, give it to someone who really needs it. I'm fine. Awesome. So Stan made a donation on YouTube, a super chat. Thank you for that, Stan. Just so folks know, I can't, the way we're trying to get it a little more cool and make it fresher in the future, and that means that I can see when super chats arise. We really appreciate the donations. They always go towards basically helping people either meditate or to charities. So Stan gave one. Thank you for that. He asked this question, which might be so specific, I'm not sure if it makes sense for you, but the question is, do you believe that Rosen C, PhD, cured the dark night of the soul. Do you know what that means?
I don't know what that means.
Okay. Second question he asked, also, would like to know what he thinks of Gary Weber's dismissal of the idea of stages and waypoints.
Wow, Gary Weber is such a complicated topic. I don't even know where to begin. So I'm going to make it a more, I've met Gary, I've talked with Gary, I know a bunch of people who know Gary. He's a very interesting person. He gets mentioned a lot in these sorts of discussions. I understand why people might be interested. Okay, so acknowledge that. That said, so it's interesting, the vast majority of people coming from Vedantic traditions or Zen traditions or a lot of Tibetan traditions are not actually familiar with the maps. They don't know them very well. They haven't read them very well. I can tell you that I've taught hundreds of people meditation over the years, been on meditation retreats with hundreds of people in various contexts and helped lead and organize retreats with a bunch of people. And I watch everybody go through the stages of insight, period. Everybody, like this is just developmental. Do they look sometimes a little different? Do they have different variants? Yeah, but you get to learn those variants. And the uncommon manifestations of common things are vastly more common than the common manifestations of uncommon things. That was a long, complicated phrase from medicine, which basically means, yeah, once you know the insight stages and their variants, like there's nothing new under the sun to me. I've literally heard thousands of reports and read thousands of forum posts. Oh, I went on a Goenka retreat and they had never told me the stages of insight. I didn't know anything about them. And all of a sudden I could see my thoughts as thoughts. And then my attention started messing with my breath. And then I started getting all this weird back pain and energy and shaking started coming through my body. And then I felt amazing and I thought I was enlightened. And then I freaked out when I hit the dark night. Yeah, and then I later read about it. I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what I went through in sequence. Thousands of times. I went through this stuff before I had any exposure to insight maps as a kid, right? And so have tons of my friends and family members. This is just part of physiological development. I'm way over the notion that the stages of insight don't occur. That's, to me, like arguing for arcane, physiological models. It would be like arguing for bile and blood and stuff like that. I mean, it's like, come on. I think the debate is long over, and anybody who still thinks it is, no, they just need to literally just watch 20 people go on retreat with the knowledge of what the stages of insight are, and they'll see the pattern, because the pattern is the pattern. It's like embryology. It's like childbirth. It develops in specific ways. And do things sometimes go off into interesting tracks? Yeah, but soon enough, basically all the interesting variants, and nobody surprises me anymore.
Yeah, and I'm gonna one thing is, it's funny because when Daniel, when we get to hang out, often we'll I guess you could call it argue, but we'll just sort of whatever.
Yeah,
debate, whatever, and it'll get fully heated, and I think that people from the outside will be like, "Oh crap! Like, are these guys going to be whatever?" And we'll fully go at it. So I thought about having like a show that just like arguing with Daniel, just like because we it's fun. It's actually because I think we both have a high threshold for confrontation that often other people are like, "Whoa," but so I want to push back. I actually don't disagree, and this is very like many people have sort of come from this position, Ken Wilber, et cetera, but it's very Shinzonian that. I could imagine him actually being entirely correct. I don't know this person terribly well, but him being entirely correct if he added a few words, such as it could be experienced that the stages of insight don't exist, or from my personal experience, I have seen a full awakening process occur and have not tracked these particular details. And often there's a degree of humility in a statement like that that's missing from this is how it is. It comes back to this one true teacher thing. So part of me is saying, yes, that what you're describing is exactly the case, and to have a little bit of sort of respect for folks who, Zen is actually we've talked about this before, as a common example where there's so much of a focus on, this is some Zen, so much of a focus on outer sensory experiences, seeing, hearing, feeling out, that when the big ka-chunk occurs, when that big sort of break happens, the continuity of outward sensing is so continuous that person has no sensory experience of the cessation material. There's just continuity, and suddenly something shifts. And so we've argued before about, like you said, well, this is phenomenology. This is what it is. It's happening even if they don't notice it. That said, my pushback, which I don't even think we've gotten into this detail, that phenomenology it has to be qualified by the person. So it's like, from a phenomenological point of view, if you do take these things into account, things that you've experienced, then yes, it is happening there in the background. Phenomenologically, from that person's perspective, when there's just a continuous, permanence of, true self or something like this, which is more on the Hindu side, there is no necessarily stage or ka-chunk or cessation, and that is phenomenologically real, and it's very hard to absorb both of these facts at the same time. And so, yeah, I just wanted to put that out there and push back around the idea that awakening requires cessation, and if you don't experience it, then you're just missing something. That we have to absorb both phenomenological models and say that that is a real experience that somebody had.
And then I would push back and
Sure.
say the vast majority of these people are not trained in microphenomenology, could just think their
Totally.
eyes blinked and didn't recognize the fruition, its entrance, its entrance, exit setup. If I wasn't trained in those things, I don't think I would recognize all of the significance and importance of them either. But once it's pointed out to you and you're well trained in it, it's basically impossible not to see. And so if I will claim that if I was actually allowed sort of complex phenomenological deep dive for these people, performance tested on retreat, that we would come up to something like the same page. And I would also say that the stable sense of a background awareness that is a true refuge is a recognized stage even within the Theravada. So people run into a lot of those stable things sort of from the territory I would think of as late third path, and they're really unbelievably compelling temptations. And I think about half of the Mahayana Sutists got stuck there, and as problems go, like it could be a heck of a lot worse. Like if I could snap my finger now and put nearly everybody into that problematic territory, which is still has sort of last golden chains holding them, but yet in a pretty amazing place from a pretty high degree, if in complete realization, I would be totally cool doing that, right? Because it would be a vastly better problem most people are dealing with. But, in terms of the actual personal stuff, bringing it down, the vast majority of practitioners I know are not dealing with that level of complexity. And so that's just really, is my tradition better than your tradition, or is this teacher better than that teacher? When actually it's not actually that, there's sort of tradition shopping or tradition one-upping, when it's actually not that much of a functional or even that useful question for where they are in their actual practice. The vast majority are, far below having to deal with those sorts of subtle high-end complexities. It's kind of like debating, it's kind of like being in junior high school and debating whose graduate programs are better, Harvard or Yale or something. Like, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
And not that relevant.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And I think that was something I wanted to add there. Microphenomenology. So there's something else, but I wanted to basically, you could imagine then an experience where if we could extract from you all of that microphenomenology and the sort of tendency and the strategy of dividing, right? Because there's the sort of lumping and splitting as major strategies of awakening. Sort of gathering things together and getting rid of edges, or going in so deeply that the spaciousness sort of expands out and consumes everything. If we could extract from you that experience, do you think this imaginary Daniel could hypothetically say, yeah, I've had the very direct experience and worked with many students, and actually these edges do not exist? It's a tautology. It's a very straightforward hypothetical or very circular hypothetical. If you had that experience, could you have that experience? I guess part of what I'm trying to say is that
I kind of lost you there, in all honesty.
That's fine. I lost myself. It happens all the time. You were there. Wait, you were there in Canada when we had that discussion about how, like, in Insight you can get into such, like, deconstructive territory, that I have this in talks now. This has been a common theme where I'll be talking to people, and I'll talk about some material about, going into something. I was like, okay, I know I was talking. I know we were talking about something. And I don't know what it was, et cetera. Like the whole system just sort of shuts down and comes back. Well, either way, we don't have to get into an endless argument.
An old argument.
It's an old argument. It's a
2,000-year-old argument.
Exactly.
At least.
Yeah. My experience versus your experience.
Or a stable background consciousness versus,
right.
emptiness.
Right. The sort of stable versus, it's like a true self versus non-self.
Right.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the people often forget that the 3 marks of existence are identical or mirrors of the, what is it? Are they called the 3 truths of Brahmanism? That was it permanence, true self, and bliss? And like people really try to force themselves into this shape of the 3 marks of existence, forgetting it was an argument from like, X number of years.
It's more than that, actually. It turns out to have many important, significant levels of depth beyond that, but that it also may have been that is
of course
true. But
yeah, no, not that
like
it's
the most trivial aspect of it is something in its historical roots.
Yeah, and I think that it's similar to like if today we said, okay, well, there's this great argument which is not me but us, right? Or is that what the Bernie slogan is? Not me, us. And it's like you take that thing which has a lot of important meaning and you take it thousands of years from now and people will say, well, what about me? Like, shouldn't I be a thing? And this is what I was going to say before. Okay, back to things making sense. I feel like part of what we're doing, and we've talked about this before, is we're landing in a place, we're touching material that's pre-linguistic. We're actually moving to a place that's prior to the mind's tendency to organize data, and it's getting less and less sort of sticky and static and used to its ordinary sort of forms. And then returning, there's this tendency to say, it's like this. And all of these descriptions, from it being God to it being emptiness to it being, et cetera, at some point, everyone is problematic in some way. If we actually compare it to the experience of, non-linguistic, non-time, all of these things like that, the Zen phrase that every teaching is a lie. So
if you're looking for a much deeper dive into that, which is basically getting into the various paradigms of integral theory and that kind of thing, you can actually find a whole podcast that I did with Matthew O'Connell on the imperfect Buddha, where my deep dive into integral theory, well, it's actually sort of a shallow dive into integral theory, but it actually helps you sort out a lot of those paradigms about, God or emptiness or in the intellect or we or me, and helps give some functional language for actually navigating across those and appreciating each of those different ways of slicing the pie and looking at it and some of the implications from those. So I would highly recommend that podcast because it actually goes into a ton of detail about this. And I think you'll find it very interesting and useful for navigating all these kinds of spiritual and political and philosophical discussions.
Excellent. So if anyone wants to, if you don't mind throwing that into the chat here below, will you just say the name one more time?
So it's the Imperfect Buddha podcast, and it's my latest one with him on integral theory.
Excellent.
I can't remember the number.
That's fine. If folks want to throw that into the chat, and if you're watching this on playback, we'll link that down below here. So, folks, I think we're going to wrap up. I think we've hit a natural sort of endpoint. But Daniel, we would absolutely adore having you back sometime to answer some of these really excellent questions that folks are throwing down here.
Cool.
Really appreciate you being here, and just want to let folks know that I think this week, Monday, we're going to have Bryan Simmons, who has been using mindfulness to replace detention in the New York City public schools to great effect. Very interesting. And then we have some other really interesting. We have Michael Taft coming up in a little while to do our second part of the Jhana series. Lots of fun stuff happening here on the live stream. We meet here, 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern, and we'd love to have you back. And if you want updates for any of this stuff, if you're on Twitch, hit the follow button. If you're on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, and we will be happy to have you back here. Daniel, thank you so very much. As always, such a delight. What a delight.
Great times.
Yeah. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you.
Okay.
Enjoy. Practice well. Be safe.
Awesome. We'll see you soon.
Bye.
Okay. So, folks, again, thank you so much. Thanks for folks who are able to support and here we go. Here we have the link here. Let's see. How do we get this on YouTube? Oh, I know how to get it on YouTube. Here's the link. Somebody posted it on Twitch. Okay, so there's the link. So, folks, it's lovely to have you, as always. In fewer than 72 hours, we will be back here to meditate again and go through whatever you want. Hey, we'll work on whatever you want. Deep dive into all these practices, into non-self, actually, we just did non-self. So we're right now on we're doing an emotional series, navigating the world. Any questions you have, drop those on our Discord, and you can have questions answered on the stream if you can't make it here live, or just join us. We usually have people on by voice and that kind of thing. So thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing everyone soon. I'm going to put this outro music on, but of course, oh, that's the wrong one. But of course, we can still see you, hear you, and feel you. Folks, thank you so much. Great to have you. Very much appreciate you being here. You guys are the best. Very fun. Thank you. And yeah, so let us know how that was for you. Let us know questions that arose. And I apologize, we couldn't answer all the questions. I think we hit a natural limit here. I've got to jump off. I got some folks I have to meet with. Very much appreciate you being here. Thanks, folks. Thank you to so many people. Josh Lamson, Quinosis, 2020 CL, Shokin, Veritable Vagabond, welcome. David Hanks, Little Liner, Go a Toes, welcome. Let's see, Yogi Yoda 5, welcome. Your Brain, welcome. Your Brain, nice to see you. Kajingris, welcome here. Timmy Davis, thank you so much for joining us from Facebook, actually. Thanks for joining along here. Connor P, thank you so much. Farzad, bringing up this great Jungian insight. And Tom, let's see, Frickhammer, Tom Frickhammer, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Who else is here? Stan, thank you for joining us. Connor, so many folks. Thank you. Catherine, my sister Krisha's here. Oh, nice. Thanks for joining, Krisha. Miss Myth Rusted, thank you. Good to see you here. Who else? Nick, of course. Nick, thank you so much for joining us. Cringemeister 6969. Hey, nice to have you here. Shokin99, as always. Savash, thank you for joining us. Rory, of course, thank you for being here. Brent, good to see you again. Welcome from Kentucky. Tomalin, as always, thanks for your support. Elliot Woodward, thank you guys. Great to have you here. Thank you again. Emily King, thank you for being here. Folks, as always, great to have you. Have a lovely day. Just enjoy that reality. Good times. Okay, folks, have fun. Looking forward to seeing you all soon. And we'll be back here Monday at 11 a.m. Eastern.